A great object for England, added Napoleon, ought to be to keep Belgium always separate from France, as France having Belgium might be said, in case of a war with England, to have possession of Hamburg. It would, however, have been better for England that Austria had it than that it should be possessed by Holland, because Austria is stronger. And when France arises from her present state of nothingness, Holland, being too weak to stand alone, will always be at her feet. If I had succeeded in my expedition to Russia, added he, I would have obliged Alexander to accede to the continental system against England, and thereby have compelled the latter to make peace. I would have also formed Poland into a separate and independent kingdom. I asked what kind of a peace he would have given to us. A very good one, replied Napoleon. I would only have insisted upon your discontinuing your vexations at sea. I asked if he would have left us Malta, to which he replied in the affirmative, adding that he was tired of war and was as well adapted for the former as the latter, as he would have employed himself in the improving and adorning of France, in the education of his son, and in writing his history. At least, said he, the Allied powers cannot take from me hereafter the great public works which I have executed, the roads which I made over the Alps, and the seas which I have united. They cannot place their feet to improve where mine have not been before. They cannot take from me the code of laws which I formed, and which will go down to the latest posterity. Thank God, of these they cannot deprive me. I said that I had been seeking for the number of ships which had been seized by the English prior to the proclamation issued by him for the detention of the English in France, and could only discover that 2 chasse-marées had been taken in Quiberon Bay. 2 chasse-marées, said Napoleon? Why, there was property to the amount of 70 millions, and I suppose above 200 ships detained before I issued the proclamation. But it is what England has always done. In the year of 1773, you did the same, and you gave us a reason that you had always done so. The great cause of dispute between you and us was that I would not allow you to do what you liked at sea, or at least, if so, that I would act as it pleased me by land. In short, I did not wish to receive laws from you, but rather to give them. Perhaps in this I pushed matters too far. Man is liable to err. When you blockaded France, I blockaded England, and it was not a paper blockade, as I obliged you to send your merchandise round by the Baltic and occupy a little island in the North Sea in order to smuggle. You said that you would shut me out from the seas, and I said that I would shut you out from the land. You succeeded, but had it not been for accidents, you would not. Your country is nothing the better for it, through the imbecility of your ministers who have aggrandized Russia instead of their native country. I asked Napoleon again, as I was anxious to put the matter beyond a doubt, whether if Talleyrand had delivered the Duke d'Enghien's letter in time to him, he would have pardoned the writer. He replied, it is probable that I might, for in it he made an offer of his services. Besides, he was the best of the family. He behaved very bravely and with much dignity before the court-martial, and denied nothing. It is true that I, as well as the nations, was very desirous of making an example of one of the family that was against him, but I still think that I would have pardoned him. I asked if he would have pardoned Pichegru. Pichegru, said he, had fallen into great contempt and was not likely to do me much mischief. In remembrance of the conquest of Holland, it is possible that I might, on condition of banishment to America. If, said he, Lord Castlereagh were to offer to place me again upon the throne of France on the same conditions that Louis fills it, I would prefer remaining where I am. There is no man more to be pitied than Louis. He is forced upon the nation as king, and instead of being allowed to ingratiate himself with the people, the allies oblige him to have recourse to measures which must increase their hatred instead of conciliating their affections. Royalty is degraded by steps they have made him adopt. On le rend si sale et méprisable, that it reflects upon the throne of England itself, in place of making him respectable, on l'a couvert d'odeur. The French nation, continued he, would never willingly consent to receive the Bourbons as kings because the Allies wish it. They would desire me because the Allies do not. But putting me out of the question. The French are desirous to see the throne filled by one chosen by themselves, and for whom no enemies or foreign powers had interfered. Ask yourself, you English, what your sentiments would be in a similar case. The wish of your ministers to reestablish despotic power and superstition in France cannot be agreeable to the English. A free people, unless indeed a desire to humble and to injure prevails, cannot wish to see another nation enslaved, ill-treated as I have been, and deprived of everything dear to me, added he. I prefer my sojourn on this execrable rock to be seated on the throne of France like Louis, as I know that posterity will do me justice. Another year or two will probably finish my career in this world, but what I have done will never perish. 1,200 years hence, my name will be mentioned with respect, while those of my oppressors will be unknown, or only known by being loaded with infamy and opprobrium. I am inclined, continued Napoleon, to doubt very much what has been said of Cromwell. It has been asserted that he always wore armor and continually changed his abode through fear of assassination. Now both these assertions have been made of me, and both I know to be false, as were most likely those imputing the same to him. The conduct of your government in attempting to put down liberty and enslave the English surprises me, continued Napoleon. For Russia, Prussia, and Austria to do so, I wonder not, as they do not merit the name of liberal or free nations. In them the will of the sovereign was always law. The slaves must obey, but that England should do so surprises me, unless, as I said to you on former occasion, political motives, jealousy, and a wish to humble and lessen those who have enriched themselves by trade prevail with your prince and among your oligarchy. The 23rd, a message sent for me to attend the governor at Plantation House. Found him in the library with Sir Thomas Reed. His Excellency said that the day before yesterday, some newspaper of a later date than any of his own had been received by Mr. Cole, the postmaster, some of which were lent to me in direct violation of the Act of Parliament, which positively prohibited communication, verbal or written, with General Bonaparte or any of his family or those about him without his, the governor's, knowledge. That he therefore wished to know for myself whether I had lent those papers or any others to General Bonaparte. I replied that I had lent those and many others at various times to Napoleon, as I had been constantly in the habit of lending papers to him since I had been on the island. That Sir George Cockburn had in more instances than one given me newspapers to take to Longwood before having perused them himself. Sir Hudson Lowe replied that it was a violation of the Act of Parliament. I replied that I was not included in the Act of Parliament, as I had made an express stipulation that I should not be considered or treated as one of the French, and would immediately resign my situation if I were required to hold it upon such terms. His Excellency said that he desired me to understand that for the future I was not to lend General Bonaparte any newspaper or be the bearer of any information, news or newspapers to him without having previously obtained his sanction. I observed that I felt it difficult how to act, for if, after the arrival of a ship, Napoleon asked me if there were any news, I could not possibly pretend ignorance. His Excellency said, as soon as the ship arrived, both Captain Poppleton and myself ought to be shut up in Longwood until the whole of the information or news brought was made known to him, and then I could obtain from him whatever news was proper to be communicated to General Bonaparte. I replied that I would not remain an hour in my situation subject to such a restriction. His Excellency observed that some months ago information of the greatest importance had been communicated by me to General Bonaparte before he, the governor, had himself known it, viz. That of the dissolution of the Chamber of Deputies in France, that I had myself told him that I had informed General Bonaparte of it, and concluded by asking if I had communicated this intelligence verbally or by means of a newspaper, and if the paper had not been lent to me by Sir Pulteney Malcolm. I replied that at such a distance of time I could not recollect whether the communication made by me had been verbal or by means of a newspaper, that most probably it had been both, and that I did not recollect from whom I had received a newspaper. His Excellency said that a person possessed as I was of a memory so extraordinarily good, could not pretend want of recollection, and repeated the question. I answered that trifles did not long remain impressed upon my memory. The governor observed that it was singular that I could not recollect that it had been lent by the admiral, and in a sneering way asked if it was not a Scotch paper. I answered that I had never seen a Scotch paper at Longwood, that Sir Pulteney Malcolm often had selected 2 or 3 papers of the old estates for me and sent the recent ones to him, Sir Hudson. His Excellency then demanded if the papers lent by the Admiral had been for myself, or if Sir Pulteney knew that they would be submitted to General Bonaparte for perusal. I replied, for myself, and I do not know whether he is aware of the use I put them to or not. Sir Hudson said that it was very extraordinary. I could not tell if the Admiral knew of it, that by the signature of His Majesty's ministers, nobody but himself had any right to communicate in any manner whatever with General Bonaparte. I observed that Sir George Cockburn had never considered it necessary to keep back newspapers from Napoleon, that the only instructions he had given me on the subject were that it would be better not to show him anything personally very offensive. Much more conversation took place, during which the governor often recurred to the Scotch paper. The 24th found Napoleon in his bedroom afflicted with headache, recommended him to use cold applications to his torched forehead and temples, which he immediately put in practice with considerable benefit. In the course of conversation afterwards, he observed that a great discordancy existed among the libels which had been published at his expense, some asserting that his lust had carried him to the length of having an incestuous correspondence with his sisters, while others maintained impuissance equally forcible. This last report, continued he, was so prevalent that when a marriage between me and a sister of the Emperor Alexander was in agitation, the Empress, her mother, said to Alexander that she would not consent to sacrifice her daughter and throw her into the arms of one who ne peut rien faire, couldn't do anything. That if her daughter were married to me, they would be obliged to act as Gustavus had done with his queen, which he could not reconcile with religion. Do you know, added he, that history about Gustavus? I replied in the negative. Why, Gustavus était impuissant, and not having an heir to the throne, il fit coucher un de ses chambellans avec la reine. He had to have one of his chamberlains with the queen, from which sprang that madman who resigned the crown a few years ago. In one of his fits of madness, that imbecile since confessed that the Swedes had acted with justice in deposing him, as he had no right to the crown. My dear mother, said Alexander, is it possible that you can believe these stories? I assure you that I should not wish you better fortune than to be sufficiently young to be married to him, and you would not long want an heir. Curikin said he told me this anecdote afterwards, which created great mirth in Paris. Napoleon then spoke about Madame de Staël. Madame de Staël said he was a woman of considerable talent and great ambition, but so extremely intriguing and restless as to give rise to the observation that she would throw her friends into the sea, that at the moment of drowning she might have opportunity of saving them. I was obliged to banish her from court at Geneva. She became very intimate with my brother Joseph, whom she gained by her conversation and writings. When I returned from Elba, she sent her son to be presented to me on purpose to ask payment of 2 millions, which her father Necker had lent out of his private property to Louis XVI, and to offer her services, provided I complied with this request. As I knew what he wanted and thought that I could not grant it without ill-treating others who were in a similar predicament, I did not wish to see him. He gave directions that he should not be introduced. However, Joseph would not be denied and brought him in spite of this order, the attendants at the door not liking to refuse my brother, especially as he said that he would be answerable for the consequences. I received him very politely, heard his business, and replied that I was very sorry it was not in my power to comply with his request, as it was contrary to the laws, and would do an injustice to many others. Madame de Staël was not, however, contented with this. She wrote a long letter to Fouché, Fouché, in which she stated her claims and that she wanted the money in order to portion her daughter in marriage to the Duc de Broglie, promising that if I complied with her request, I might command her and hers, that she would be black and white for me. Fouché communicated this and advised me strongly to comply, urging that in so critical a time she might be of considerable service. I answered that I would make no bargains,